Welcome. I'm Erik Fleming, host of A Moment with Erik Fleming, the podcast of our time. I want to personally thank you for listening to the podcast. If you like what you're hearing, then I need you to do a few things. First, I need subscribers. I'm on Patreon at patreon.com/A Moment with Erik Fleming. Your subscription allows an independent podcaster like me the freedom to speak truth to power and to expand and improve the show. Second, leave a 5-star review for the podcast on the streaming service you listen to it. That will help the podcast tremendously. Third, go to the website, momenterik.com. There you can subscribe to the podcast, leave reviews and comments, listen to past episodes, and even learn a little bit about your host. Lastly, don't keep this a secret like it's your own personal guilty pleasure. Tell someone else about the podcast. Encourage others to listen to the podcast and share the podcast on your social media platforms because it is time to make this moment a movement. Thanks in advance for supporting the podcast of our time. I hope you enjoyed this episode as well.
The following program is hosted by the NVG Podcast Network.
Hello, and welcome to another Moment with Erik Fleming. I am your host, Erik Fleming. And today I have two guests on, and I was trying to come up with a title for this one because these two ladies are very unique, but yet they're very similar, right? One is a law professor, and one is a practicing attorney who is now an elected official. And, you know, and just going over the conversations with them and all that, the best title I could come up with was Actors of Democracy, right? Because they represent two different aspects. One, as I mentioned, is an elected official. So that young lady is doing her part to promote democracy by serving. And then the other guest, she is an actor of democracy by her activism. And her role is in educating future activists, right? And so that's something that I think, people need to understand that those two things work together. We have to have elected officials that understand the importance of public service. And then we need to have activists to hold those of us who have had the privilege of serving or are currently serving accountable. Right. And so I think that's, I'm not the best at creating titles, but I think that aptly applies to the two women, incredible women that I have on as guests. And I hope that you agree with my assessment as you listen to the interviews. Still trying to get subscribers. So please go to patreon.com/A Moment with Erik Fleming and sign up there, or you can go to momenterik.com and do the same thing. Plus you can learn a little bit about the show and about me. And hopefully, that if you like what you're hearing, you leave a review, all that stuff, right? So, just please do that. The value of independent voices at this time is amazing. When I sit and look at television news now, you get what you can, right? And I have seen some optimistic moments, but the real strength right now is those of us who have platforms like this, who can talk to whoever they want to talk to them as long as you want to, and, say what you want to say and be as truthful as you can be, right? Because there are forces on the other side that are doing the same thing. And so we have to continue to be out there. So support us, as many of us as you can, right? And again, the most important way to support us is to listen. So I, again, am grateful for y'all tuning in. All right. So without any further ado, let's go ahead and kick this off. And as always, we kick it off with a moment of news with Grace G.
Thanks, Eric. John Bolton, former national security advisor to President Trump, has been federally indicted on 18 counts related to the transmission and retention of national defense information. A federal judge in California ordered the Trump administration to halt mass layoffs of federal workers during a partial government shutdown. Dozens of journalists from at least 30 news organizations vacated their Pentagon offices and lost their credentials after refusing to sign a new access policy that they claim threatens their ability to report independently. Several Republican activists were fired or demoted after a private leaked Telegram chat spanning 2,900 pages exposed racist, anti-Semitic, and violent messages exchanged between young Republican leaders. 16 people are feared dead after a devastating explosion at a munitions factory in rural Tennessee. A federal appeals court rejected the Trump administration's request to immediately deploy National Guard troops to Illinois. A federal judge in Montana dismissed a lawsuit by youth activists trying to block President Trump's pro-fossil fuel energy policies. Michael Randrianirina, the new military leader of Madagascar, announced he would soon be sworn in as the country's president following the coup that ousted President Andry Rajoelina. Former U.S. President Joe Biden, who was diagnosed with prostate cancer in May, has started undergoing radiation therapy and hormone treatment as part of his care plan. The Oklahoma Department of Education is rescinding a 2024 directive requiring the Christian Bible in every classroom and its incorporation into lessons. And a Michigan mother is facing a felony food stamp fraud charge, punishable by up to 10 years in prison for allegedly using her EBT benefits to buy ingredients for baked goods she sold to support her family. I am Grace G, and this has been a Moment of News.
All right. Thank you, Grace. And now it is time for my guest, Sahar Aziz. Sahar Aziz is a distinguished professor of law, Chancellor's Social Justice Scholar, and Middle East and Legal Studies Scholar at Rutgers University Law School. Professor Aziz's scholarship adopts an interdisciplinary approach to examine the intersections of national security, race, and civil rights with a focus on the adverse impact of national security laws and policies on racial, ethnic, and religious minorities in the U.S. Her research also investigates the relationship between authoritarianism, terrorism, and rule of law in the Middle East. She is the founding director of the interdisciplinary Rutgers Center for Security, Race, and Rights, and a faculty affiliate of the African American Studies Department at Rutgers University, Newark. Professor Aziz serves on the Rutgers Newark Chancellor's Commission on Diversity and Transformation, as well as the editorial board of the Arab Law Quarterly and the International Journal of Middle East Studies. Professor Aziz teaches courses on national security, critical race theory, Islamophobia, evidence, torts, and Middle East law. Professor Aziz is the recipient of numerous awards, including a Soros Equality Fellowship, a New America, Middle Eastern, and North African American National Security and Foreign Policy Next Generation Leader, the Research Making an Impact Award by the Institute for Social Policy and Understanding, the Derek Bell Award from the American Association of Law Schools Minority Section, and an Emerging Scholar by Diverse Issues in Higher Education. She serves on the board of directors of Rethink Media, the Project on Democracy in the Middle East, and Democracy in the Arab World Now. Professor Aziz's groundbreaking book, The Racial Muslim, When Racism Quashes Religious Freedom, examines how bigotry racializes immigrant Muslims through a historical and comparative approach. She has published over 30 academic articles and book chapters. Her articles are published in the Harvard National Security Journal, Washington and Lee Law Review, Nebraska Law Review, George Washington International Law Review, Penn State Law Review, and the Texas Civil Rights and Civil Liberties Journal. Professor Aziz's commentary has appeared in the New York Times, CNN.com, Carnegie Endowment Sada Journal, Middle East Institute, FoxNews.com, World Politics Review, Houston Chronicle, Austin Statesman, The Guardian, and Christian Science Monitor. She is a frequent speaker and has appeared on CNN, BBC World, PBS, C-SPAN, MSNBC, Fox News, and Al Jazeera English. She is an editor of the Race and Law Professors blog. She previously served on the board of the ACLU of Texas and as a non-resident fellow at the Brookings Institute, Doha. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my distinct honor and privilege to have as a guest on this podcast, Sahar Aziz. All right, Sahar Aziz. How you doing, ma'am? You doing good?
I'm doing great. Thank you for inviting me onto your podcast.
Well, I thank you for accepting the invitation. You are one of the more dynamic intellectuals in this country, especially dealing with issues with free speech and Islamophobia in this nation. And I know you kind of got into some craziness based on that kind of stuff, you know. And so we'll touch on all that kind of stuff, but I'm just really, really honored that you came on. It means a lot to me and it'll mean a lot to the listeners. So let's start this off with a couple of icebreakers like I normally do. So the first one is a quote. I do not care if you agree with me or not. It's not my job. My job is to expose you to a set of ideas, a set of analysis, to provide this little evidence that I believe supports my conclusions, and then you guys do the research. Your job is to think. What does that quote mean to you?
I think that was what I said to the Boston College students a few semesters ago when I was giving a presentation about the way in which Palestinian human rights was completely erased by the pervasive pro-Israeli Zionist narratives that dominate Western media and dominate political rhetoric. And I remember when I was giving lecture series at the Center for Security, Race, and Rights, which I direct at Rutgers Law School, and I'll put a pitch in for the website, csrr.rutgers.edu, and on social media at Rutgers CSRR. And I was getting quite a bit of pushback by those who disagreed with the positions that I was taking, which I was sure to always cite facts because I am a lawyer. And so that is part of my training, is if I'm going to make an argument, I'm going to cite facts. And I was being accused of indoctrinating students, which I thought was a laughable proposition. The first is in college, the students are adults. And a lot of people don't seem to want to grant them that recognition. These are not children, actually. They are adults. And so when parents would get very upset, but why are these students being exposed to these professors, which the parents often didn't know much about what actually was being taught at university? They would say, oh, these poor students. And I thought, well, these are adults that you allowed to leave your home to go and learn for themselves and to be critical thinkers. And in fact, you're paying quite a bit of money for them to think for themselves, because you could always have just indoctrinated them at home and just given them a bunch of things to read and say, memorize it, believe it, and don't debate anything. But I think most parents and families who send their kids to college, who have that privilege and that access to do so, do it because they want them to be exposed to different ideas, and they want them to be equipped with the skills to be exposed to those different ideas and debate them. And obviously in a way that is civil and professional and respectful, and is not coercive or mean-spirited. but is going to make people uncomfortable, because otherwise, why bother, right? Why bother going and learning about things that you either don't know anything about or you don't agree with initially? So I wanted to just remind the students, I had a big audience of college students at that time, that, you don't have to agree with me. You chose to come to learn about my perspective of what, at that point, I was arguing that what Israel was doing in Gaza was a genocide, at a time when that was not a popular position and when many people were challenging the very facts that proved it. And also, I was arguing that the reason that the American society and media was refusing to recognize the genocide was because of the dehumanization of Palestinians. And part of that is the dehumanization of Muslims writ large. And I was providing them with the fact. And I also said something that was, I knew, controversial, but again, from the positionality of Muslims and Arabs and Palestinians, it certainly seemed to be the truth, which is that when it came to the debates on campus, when it came to the protests on campus, those who were the ones that were nonviolent, the ones that were civil, yes, heated, contested, but within the bounds of the law, that the universities were privileging the complaints and grievances of Jewish students while completely dismissing and violating outright the complaints or the rights of Palestinian students and Arab and Muslim students. And so I stated I wanted to show them, and I showed the facts on the screen, that this is how privilege works. It is when two groups of people are similarly situated and that they get treated completely different, one inferior and one superior. And that you are believed when you complain or when you claim that you are hurt or offended or believe your rights are violated. You are granted all the due process rights. Your demands are accommodated, and that effectively you're treated like a human, an equal first-class citizen. And what we were seeing was that the Jewish students and the Jewish faculty were obtaining that status. Meanwhile, the Palestinian students, the Muslim students, the Arab students were being treated as if they were criminals. They were being treated as if they were presumptively anti-Semitic, as if those protests were about hating Jews, when in fact those protests were about trying to save Palestinian lives from being killed by a foreign military. In this case, it was the Israeli military, by wanting to stop the funding of by their money, by the American taxpayer money, the Israeli military that was killing Palestinians by the thousands and sometimes by the hundreds, sometimes by the tens every day. We now have at least 80,000 Palestinians dead. 68,000 have been reported dead. There's 12,000 at least under the rubble that they're now discovering and finding the skeletons under the rubble, and hundreds of thousands that have been injured. And so the fact that the Palestinian students were being treated as if they had no right to dissent in a country that claims that free speech is a fundamental right, it makes us America, it distinguishes us as a country. While Jewish students and Zionist students, I shouldn't say Jewish, pro-Israeli Zionist students, most of them were Jewish, some of them were also Christian, were being believed even when they didn't even have evidence to show that the protests, for example, were actually violating the policy. So all that is to say that we have to be able to listen to other perspectives and not presume that just because someone disagrees with us that they want to hurt us, or just because someone disagrees with us that they have bad intent. And that the response is not to assume to demand that person then gets canceled or gets silenced, right? The response is to either disengage if you don't want to engage in the debate, if you don't want to attend the event, if you don't want to listen, that's up to you. Or to hold that person accountable and say, well, here are the facts you stated. I'd like to offer alternative facts. I would like to show how what you're stating is actually false, so there's a material omission. Or to hold your own event, right? And also not to assume that colleges are there for indoctrination. Because if anybody who's gone to college, you know it is not there for indoctrination. Unless we give the Trump administration what it wants. And then it surely will be.
All right. So now I need you to give me a number between 1 and 20. All right, here's your question. Do you think there is such a thing as unbiased news or media, and why?
there's no such thing as unbiased anything. We are humans and we have biases, and anyone who studies social psychology or reads their literature knows that we are not designed, our brains aren't designed to be unbiased. We're constantly trying to identify what is dangerous, what is risky, what is harmful, and avoid it. And oftentimes that leads us to have all sorts of explicit biases and implicit biases, and in ways that can be very harmful, right? I mean, racism is also a form of bias. So I think that's where, going back to critical thinking, is so important. We have to always, when we read the news, we have to ask ourselves, who's writing it? What are their political leanings? What are their financial incentives for covering the story? Why are they covering the story the way they are? Who did they interview? Who didn't they interview? Who funds this particular outlet? And the ideal scenario is that we can read 3 or 4 or 5 articles about a similar topic by sources that have different answers to those questions, and triangulate and eventually come to a point where we feel individually that there is some sense of truth by putting those different sources together. But I think all of us are biased. And bias doesn't necessarily mean we have bad intent. Right? Why we're biased, the motivation for us being biased is not necessarily malicious, but that can still cause harmful consequences to society, which we're already seeing in the algorithmic silos that social media is creating, where we are reading, our biases are being reinforced over and over again through these algorithms, because every time you like something or you share something or you slow down on a scroll, the algorithm knows, okay, this has caught that person's attention and presumes they want to see more of it. And if it's news reading, it can then become what we call validation bias, where it's just validating whatever you already believe rather than challenging it and making you think a little bit more expansively. So that is inevitable in every society. But I think the key, if we're trying to have as little bias as possible, or at least competing biases as accessible, is that we strive for independent media. I think the more that the media is controlled by the government or controlled by very few people, oftentimes very wealthy, or very few people who have homogeneous political leanings, then it can get very dangerous in terms of creating a society that is in fact indoctrinated, but has just simply not been exposed to other ways of thinking and key facts that are relevant to that particular topic, right? In order for us to analyze, like, how do we solve this problem? How do we even define this problem? When we're talking about a problem that affects the public, right? The public interest.
Yeah. All right. So as we're recording this, the ceasefire has been agreed upon with Israel and Hamas. What is your initial reaction to hearing that?
Well, this ceasefire should have been announced and abided by over a year ago. It was something that Israel had refused to. Israel just has no interest. The current Israeli government, I should say, which is a very right-wing government, and even the most supportive Israeli groups know that this is the most right-wing government that this country has had since it established itself in 1948 through a war, right? Through terrorist acts. I mean, I think we can't rewrite history. 1948 was when the militia, there were 3 groups, the Irgun, the Stern Gang, and the Haganah. And all of them had been engaged in terrorist acts, especially targeting the British before 1948, wanting to get the British out, and also targeting the Palestinians, who were the indigenous people. And in 1948, when the British had said, they succeeded. The British said, we're out. We can't handle this anymore. We can't seem to resolve this conflict. Gave it to the United Nations. The United Nations offered a partition. Partition was not binding. The Palestinians said no, because why would we give half of our land to people who came from Europe? And that was essentially the impetus, the justification that these 3 militias and extremist groups used to say, okay, we're now going to attack and we're going to take this land by force. And we're going to target civilians, and that's terrorism. Terrorism is politically motivated violence, right? And the motivation was, we want to ethnically cleanse you, kick you out of this land that is your land, and take it for ourselves because we've decided it belongs to us. Whatever the reason, whether we believe God gave it to us, whether we believe might makes right, and if we can physically take it, then it belongs to us. There's all sorts of justifications. But the point is that since that time, that we now have the most right-wing Israeli government. And that government has had every incentive and has stated it very explicitly. So there's plenty of evidence to show that what it wants is to get rid of every Palestinian in Gaza by multiple means. First, kill, right? Bomb, sniper, booby trap, use drones, armed drones. The second is injure and let them die from the lack of medical care, which is why you have hospitals that were bombed. Almost every hospital has been bombed. Half of them have been completely destroyed. All the universities have been destroyed. The vast majority of schools have been destroyed. I believe 92% of Gaza has been bombed. And if you look at the pictures, they speak for themselves. And so by destroying the healthcare system, what you do is you ensure that those who are injured from the bombing don't have the health care that would prevent them from dying from the injuries. So they will die. And then there are the sick and the elderly and the disabled. Again, when the healthcare system is completely destroyed intentionally, those people will die when they otherwise would not have died. Then you start them, which we saw in its worst case from May until July, that there have been multiple iterations of intentional use of starvation as a weapon of war, which is illegal in international law. And in fact, you were saying, I think they had 450 that they counted as of today or as of a few weeks ago that have been killed, that have died of starvation, children and adults. And then the rest you ethnically cleanse. You push them to the south. You ask Egypt to take them. Egypt rejects. And then you start shopping around, which is what Netanyahu did. He goes to various countries and said, will you take them? We'll pay you. We want to kick them out. So that is effectively what the primary objective has been, the Netanyahu government, since at least November of 2023, and one could argue even as early as mid-October, right? Because the response of the Israelis quickly shifted from self-defense to genocide, right? Yes, 1 week, 2 week, but the destruction was so massive, so pervasive, and so protracted. And when there were offers of ceasefires, which in one point there was a ceasefire, and then Israel started again bombing, it was clear that Israel didn't want a ceasefire. Yes, it wanted the hostages back, but it didn't want to stop its objective, which was, again, to eliminate Palestinians in whole or in part in Gaza. And there are plenty of statements showing that was the intent. This has been litigated in the media. It's been litigated before the International Criminal Court of Justice. So the evidence is very damning 2 years later. So I think that my first reaction is, why didn't this happen over a year ago? How many tens of thousands of Palestinians would still be alive? And the second thing is, I don't know if it will stick because Israel has shown that it is not trustworthy. Hamas at this point, early on, in what started out as a war between the two, and then, as I said, transitioned into genocide, Hamas has it is an asymmetrical conflict, or it is an asymmetrical war, if you want to call that, between the two of them, meaning that Hamas does not have an army, it does not have a military, it's a ragtag militia. Its leaders were all killed within a couple months after October 7th, and it was effectively defeated, and from a military perspective, very, very early on. And within 4 to 6 weeks, everything after that was just collective punishment. Even if Israel said, oh, this is all about fighting Hamas. But the reality is that Hamas was weakened early on. And they had said, okay, we'll give you the hostages, but stop bombing. Permanent ceasefire, not temporary. And we have to have an out, right? Whatever that may be. And there are different ceasefire options. At one point, there's reports that Hamas even agreed at the third or fourth round of ceasefire attempts that they said, fine, we won't have any role in the government's Gaza. But again, the Israelis rejected that. So I'm not optimistic that once all the hostages are released, Israeli hostages are released, that Israel will not just go back to bombing Gaza. The only person that can stop Israel is Trump. There's no other leverage over Netanyahu and his maniacal right-wing extremist government. Because once those hostages are released, and I think they should be released, I think they should have been released a long time ago as part of a comprehensive ceasefire and a comprehensive peace deal, then what is to stop Netanyahu from bombing again? There's nothing stopping.
Yeah. So how has this conflict affected you personally? And has it given you more concern about things, or has it strengthened your resolve to keep fighting?
The genocide in Gaza, again, committed by the Israeli government, funded by the American government, has validated to many Palestinians and Arabs and Muslims in America and in the world that our lives have no meaning to the Western world. That a government and a military that has the full throttle support of Europe and the U.S. in political support and economic and military support can do things to our people, to people that look like us, or the people that are in fact our direct family, depending if you're Palestinian or not, to people who have the same religion, predominantly Muslim. In Gaza, I think there's only 5% Christians. Although with Palestinians, it's between 15 to 20% worldwide that are Christian. But the vast majority in Gaza are Muslim. And that if any Arab country had done to Europeans or to Jews or to Christians what the Israelis have done to the Palestinians and the Muslims, there would have been an immediate outcry. There would have been immediate military intervention. There would have been immediate leverage of international law to hold those criminals accountable. And instead, people just made excuses. They looked away. They were silent, or they outright supported it. And so that is very, very disheartening. And I think what it shows is that we have a disease in the U.S., at least, of hatred towards Palestinians and towards Muslims. And I think we have a lot we need to learn about Germany. We need to understand, there's an entire industry that was created, a discipline that was created called Holocaust and Genocide Studies. It was spearheaded by Jews, rightfully so, because they thought, how did this happen? How did we get to this point where 6 million Jews were slaughtered? How do we get to the point where we have an entire society and societies who either outright supported it, did nothing, or were silent? And this doesn't happen overnight. And so for Palestinians, when your population is 2 million and 80,000, and that's the conservative estimate, we're going to find out. So there are some people who believe it's 250,000 that have been killed over the last 2 years, or that have died and should not have died, right? Had there been enough food and a functioning medical system and medicine. That is 20% of your population. Right? This is not a small number from a percentage perspective, right? And in a very short amount of time. So I think that it just reminded us how much damage the war on terror had done, at least in the immediate term. I mean, before 9/11, I wrote a book called The Racial Muslim, which talks about the pre-9/11 and the post-9/11 era and this racialization of Muslims and extrinsically also Arabs. But post-9/11 really laid that strong foundation that just dehumanized people who were associated with Islam and now even more explicitly Palestinian identity. Now, what I think is equally harmful, at least in a U.S. context, is the fact that those of us who, like everything that I just said, will then invite hate against me. It will invite death threats. It will invite assaults, threats of physical assault, doxing, harassment, intimidation. And the people who do it are not held accountable. So not only are you supposed to support or at least look away when Israel commits a genocide of Palestinians, but you can't even dissent against that. Because if you do, suddenly you're accused of hating Jews. When the entire reason why you're dissenting is because you're trying to get an Israeli government, the foreign government of Israel, to stop killing and starving and maiming Palestinians. That has nothing to do with hating Jews, right? That is about a state, one of the most powerful states in the Middle East, with one of the most powerful militaries in the region, that has attacked 5 Arab countries in the last 2 years. They have bombed Lebanon. They have bombed Syria. They have bombed Iran. They have bombed Yemen. They have bombed Gaza. Right? This is not a weak state. This is a very, very strong state that is completely dismissing and refusing to follow international law. So I think it has caused, different responses within our diverse communities, but it has also shown that international law is only relevant when Western countries, white people in North America and white people in Europe want to use it to prosecute Black and brown people in countries that are not in Europe and North America. And that has really called that entire legal system into question. And the most perverse aspect of it is that international legal system was created post-Holocaust. It was created so that there wouldn't be another World War II. So there wouldn't be a World War III, and it was created so that there wouldn't be another Holocaust, and it would be created that there wouldn't be other genocide, even if they didn't reach the same degree or severity as the Holocaust. Because what makes something a genocide is you don't have to have 6 million people slaughtered as what happened against Jews. It's not about the numbers, right? It's about the intent. It's about the methodology. It's about what ultimately, how many people and how they're being annihilated. And with the objective of annihilation in part or in whole.
So, because I'm gonna combine a couple of questions I had written down into one. And it's based off of what you're talking about with the dehumanization. Do you think that it is proximity to whiteness that determines the humanity, or do you think that Islam is treated more like a political ideology than a religion? Or do you think it's a combination of both?
Well, now you're getting into my book, The Racial Muslim. And I am a critical race theorist, which also invites other forms of attacks, which effectively, it argues that, at least in the U.S. context, and I would say you could use it also in the European context, but TRT is very much based in U.S. history and U.S. politics, is that there is a racial hierarchy. And those who are at the top of that racial hierarchy are the most privileged. Those who are at the bottom are the least privileged. And then in between, there is different levels of privilege. And that tends to shift around based on different points in time. And that racial hierarchy at the top are people whose race is socially constructed as white. And those at the bottom are those whose race are socially constructed as Black. And I say social construction because it isn't a biological fact. It isn't an objective fact. There are people who 100 years ago were Jewish and Eastern European, and they weren't fully white in the social construction of race and whiteness. Similarly, Irish Catholics, similarly, Italian Catholics. And there are now people who, for example, Arabs, right, who phenotypically, in other words, what they physically look like, you may think, oh, that person is white in how we are socialized to see whiteness. But in fact, their name is Muhammad, or the woman wears a headscarf. And so now they're at the bottom or near the bottom of that hierarchy. And so they are not Black, but they have become close to Blackness, right? And they can shift up and down based on, again, multiple factors that change. Now, the reason why CRT can be controversial is because it rejects colorblindness. And it doesn't reject colorblindness because it doesn't want colorblindness. It's because it's not possible given the realities that American society has undergone. When you have chattel slavery and genocide of indigenous people as the foundation of the system, until that can somehow be remedied at a systemic level, and you have then you're going to continue to have these racial hierarchies, because then you have the Reconstruction and then the regression against the anti-Reconstruction, and then you have Jim Crow, right? And then you have the Chinese exclusion, and you can go all throughout American history, and you will see this constant tension that repeats this racial hierarchy, that reinforces it. the degree changes, the severity changes, the consequences change. So thankfully, being at the bottom of the racial hierarchy does not mean you are enslaved. It does not mean that you are legally segregated. But it does mean that you, as a collective, right, the probability of your chances and access to wealth, gainful employment, freedom, physical liberty, high quality education is quite low because systemic racism has produced overrepresentation of Black people in prison, overrepresentation of Black people in very low quality schools that are in high poverty areas. That is not because there is something wrong with these people. It is the system. And so until we can acknowledge that system and really try to fix it meaningfully, we're not colorblind. So once you acknowledge that, then you have to say, okay, what do we do about it? And how do we understand society and how do we develop our policies? And so what I was arguing in the Racial Muslim is it's not just what you look like that racializes you, it's also your religion. And if you ask Jews about anti-Semitism in the early 1900s, that is exactly what happened to them. Similarly to Italian Catholics. They were European. They looked European. They were the right kind of European. And it was because they were Jewish. Well, it was because they were Catholic. But if you fast forward 100 years later, now whiteness has been reconstructed socially. It has expanded to include that. So I think that we have to just recognize that at least at a macro level and at a systems level, there is still an enormous amount of inequality. And we were making some progress. And I think this is where the Black Lives Matter movement was really instrumental and quite revolutionary in terms of mobilizing a generation of people, especially young people of various races. Yes, it was led by Black people. But if you looked at the protests, there were white folks and there were Arab folks and there were Latino folks and there were, and there were Jewish people and there were Muslim people. And it was quite a diverse movement that had recognized we have a serious problem with systemic racism. And while Blacks are again, my position based on my reading of history and my research, my position is the group that suffers the most from systemic racism are Black people. And then but they are not the only people that suffer from systemic racism. And they suffer in different ways. So ICE is not going around picking up Black folks. It's picking up and raiding and ruining the entire safety and security of Latinos and Afro-Latinos who are also they're Latin and Black. But they're not, right? And similarly with national security, it was really focused on Muslim and Arab communities. So there are different ways that systemic racism functions. And so ultimately, I think we need to just understand those intersections of identity and understand how systemic racism operates. And the reason why Trump, with Steve Miller at the helm, is so obsessed with deporting 1 million immigrants, 1 million human beings every year is because, and the criminalizing DEI, criminalizing any talk about race, any talk about equity, any talk about racism is because they have seen how the Black Lives Matter movement and kind of the consequences of it have started to change how people think and have started to say, yeah, we do need to be more conscientious about how privilege is distributed, right, along race and how race and class intersect. And we need to start changing how we hire, how we promote, how we teach, how we live, how we set housing policy, how we set criminal justice policies, everything. And to try to finally break through this systemic racism that's gripped our nation. And what that's done is a white nationalist's worst nightmare, right? It has produced all of this diversity in powerful positions, right? They don't care about diversity among the lowest classes of society. They don't care if there's diversity among those who are barely making a living wage. They care about diversity in positions of power, positions of wealth in elected office, in university presidencies and administrations, in CEO positions, and so on and so forth. Because then you're going to have decisions that will not exclusively serve one particular or two particular groups. It will, because there'll be different people and different perspectives and different lived experiences at the decision-making table. The decisions will be more inclusive. They will be more nuanced. They will be more sensitive to the way that something that's facially neutral may actually be very racist in practice, right? But step one is you got to get everybody at the table that has a stake, right, in the policies. So I'm not surprised at all about this white nativist, white Judeo. It's a Judeo-Christian nativist backlash, because Jews and Christians who are white, who are of European origin, are effective. I mean, groups that claim to represent them. They obviously do not represent all of those demographics, but they claim to represent them, are trying to reverse the diversity of the population. They are trying really hard to stop 2050 from being the year when people of European origin and of Judeo-Christian faith are not the majority.
Yeah. So you stated that, and kind of touching on some of that answer, you stated that the Palestinian human rights student movement was a direct but underappreciated legacy of the Black Lives Matter movement. Where is the underappreciation coming from, and why do you think that is?
Black Lives Matter was the movement for the generation of Americans that are between the ages of 20 and 35, comparable to the anti-Vietnam movement. Right? If you meet people who were in college or in high school during the anti-Vietnam movement, it really shaped how they understood American society, how they understood politics and power and war. And I attribute their experiences to the subsequent decades of reforms to our legal system, reforms to our surveillance laws to make it more protective of privacy and not allow the government to just violate civil liberties as it pleases. They were much more sensitive to going to war abroad without believing wholesale that the wars were intended to keep America safe as opposed to expand its empire. And so these types of social movements, they shape an entire generation. And if you see the students who were in the Palestinian Solidarity movement in college, and also those who were out in the streets, not just in college campuses, many of them were in high school during the Black Lives Matter movement. So they may have been at the protests, or they may have been watching what was happening on social media. And they were also learning and being exposed to what is systemic racism, what is anti-Black systemic racism. They were seeing live Black men being shot. They were hearing for themselves from Black communities saying, we've been living this nightmare for decades. The police are constantly engaging in excessive force against us. They're constantly racially profiling us. We have so many of our brothers who are in jail, and we don't believe they should be in jail. There is, innocence projects have been expanding, and now that DNA is being used, it has exonerated sizable numbers of Black men. And I think as they learn that, so whether they learned it on social media, whether they learned it by going out and joining the movement themselves, they realize that this is what you are told is not always the truth, and that you don't know what is happening unless you listen to those who it's harmed the most. And I think that mentality of empathy for those who are not the powerful in a particular dispute, and also the ability to see for themselves. I think they are very sensitive to wanting to see, not just be told what's actually happening on the ground, allowed them to realize, okay, what's happening in Palestine, what we've been told about Israel is not true, right? They've been told that Israel is the only democracy in the Middle East, but then they learn about the way that Israel has militarily occupied the West Bank since 1967. It has similarly with Gaza until 2007. And then after that, it essentially imposed a blockade that was severe at some points, very severe, less severe. It learned that many of the Palestinians in Israel have Israeli citizenship are second-class citizens and experience similar forms of discrimination as African Americans. It learned that in 1948 it was not this war between two nations, but in fact, and it wasn't that the Palestinians were trying to kill the Jews, but in fact that it was the Jews who would come from Europe seeking refuge, yes, but seeking refuge in a way that then had to kill or eliminate or occupy the indigenous people. And the American youth knew about the story of the American Indian. And they were much more educated about what happened to the Native Americans in terms of the settler colonial experience and the genocide that their own country is a product of. So I think all of that caused them, and the Black Lives Matter also offered a model movement of collective action, nonviolent collective action, and agency, and a sense of distrust and saying, no, we're not just going to believe what the adults say or what those in power say. And our eyes see for ourselves on the cameras of the citizen journalists and the Palestinian journalists. So, by the way, every time a Palestinian journalist was successfully showing the amount of violence and murder, children being sniped, children who were orphaned, entire families being wiped out by the Israeli military, those journalists would get killed. They would get assassinated intentionally because Israel has a very, very sophisticated drones technology, very sophisticated surveillance technology. You can use your phone, your own iPhone, as a way to surveil you and to track you. And they were realizing, wait a minute, every time a Palestinian journalist was reporting on what was happening, they would get killed. They would get assassinated by the Israelis. And of course, the Israelis say, oh, they're Hamas. And at some point, people realize this is just a cover. Everybody is not Hamas. Right? Many of these people are just normal civilians who are trying to stay alive. And that just caused the students to be even more skeptical. But yeah, so I do think that the Black Lives Matter, and that's why Trump hates the Black Lives Matter. The white nationalist movement hates the Black Lives Matter movement, and they hate the Palestinian solidarity movement. They hate the labor union. Right? Anything that is going to create collective action, mobilizing people to challenge those who have the disproportionate amount of wealth and power are going to be repressed. And that's kind of the myth of American democracy, is we're not that democratic. We're democratic light. We're getting less and less democratic now with Trump. And then finally, I think the students who lived through the Palestine Solidarity movement, which again is a generation right after Black Lives Matter, have learned a really hard lesson. That nonviolent protest is essentially criminalized in this country. That if you do anything beyond just superficial performative protests, anything where you actually want to change something, you will get disciplined, you will get expelled. And that these universities that market and recruit based on the mantra of free thinking and critical thinking and the right to dissent, and really trying to teach them how to be model citizens that think for themselves and act based on that, again, in ways that are nonviolent, that they are selling them a false bill of goods.
Yeah. So, and that kind of goes with something you had said before about racial justice in the United States has always been a cycle of violent repression followed by nonviolent progress, prompting retrenchment by white elites. The only thing I would argue with that is that there was one period in American history where there was violence, and that was the Civil War. And that led to the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments. But ever since then, it's been back to more traditional democratic strategies, like going to court or protesting or those kind of things. So, I think you're absolutely, I know you're absolutely right about that. I
want to highlight that my analysis in the U.S. is highly because America is a highly racialized society. You can take that analysis and apply it to other countries and just identify who are the elites. Sometimes it's a particular tribe or group of tribes. Sometimes it's an oligarchy. Sometimes it is people of a particular linguistic tradition or people that are from the North versus the South. So the hierarchies exist. The hierarchies of power exist in every society. But in our society, in the U.S., race continues to be a master category. In other words, the race that you have been ascribed, right, that's socially constructed to you, contributes significantly to your life opportunities, your access, your relationship or interaction with the state, with the police, with wealth, job opportunities. That is not something that any of us want. We identify because we want to stop it. We don't identify because we support it. But you can't stop it unless you identify it and study it and say, okay, what's happening here? Because the days of intentional discrimination those are relatively long gone. Yes, we still do have people intentionally discriminating, but most of the discrimination happened at a systemic level, right? At a structural level, what we call disparate impact, where you have policies, you have laws that are facially neutral, but they are usually enforced in a way, either selectively or even non-selectively, but enforced such that one group of people, it's designed to disadvantage them. So if you make college expensive and there's no scholarships and there's no government Pell Grants to those who are low income, you have designed college to be inaccessible to people who are low income. And if you have a high concentration of a certain racial group who are low income or multiple groups, then you have essentially shut the door to college education to those people, even if they may have the intelligence, have the ability to succeed in college.
Yeah. And, you're addressing hypocrisy in that folks say, well, we don't want, and so many people getting, accessing higher education, all that, but yet they still follow to tradition that was set by Eisenhower that college education is a national security interest, right? So you got to have people educated in the United States. So the next time we fight somebody like Germany that was technologically advanced for its time, we got to have smart people. But we're trying to pick and choose who the smart people are, and then it becomes a numbers game. So if you don't have the numbers, anyway, that's a whole nother show, Doc. We'll we'll get to that later. I want to close out with this, and it's kind of personal for me, and I think a lot of people like me that are Black. So I grew up in Chicago. So my first exposure to Islam was the Nation of Islam, Elijah Muhammad, Malcolm X, Louis Farrakhan, even Wallace Dean, Muhammad Ali. All those people lived in Chicago at one point, and you see the brothers with the bow ties and all that. So that was kind of a young Black person's introduction into Islam. But as you get older, you realize, well, that's not the traditional Islam. And so when Wallace Dean broke from the Nation, and then you read into Malcolm X and how he made his pilgrimage to Mecca and how it changed their life, it's like, oh, well, so Islam's a lot more deeper than, so those are the people that I see coming out of these nice, fancy buildings, and they're dressed a certain way and all that kind of stuff. And so but all those images were positive to us. And my generation came of age to really how negative people perceived Islam at 9/11. So, I've had guests on, and we've, people that have, especially during this time, and it's talking about the challenges that people that practice the Islamic faith deal with. But I want you to talk to me and talk to the audience about what is the most beautiful or satisfying aspect of the religion of Islam. Because I think, to me, for one narrative, there always has to be a counter. So what if you, well, I don't want to say an elevator pitch, but what is an attractive thing about that faith?
So I'll start by recommending a book for non-Muslims called The Vision of Islam by Sachiko Murado and William Chittick, which I find to be a relatively concise description of the foundations of Islam, especially spiritually. Islam is a world religion. There are 1.8 billion Muslims. And as a result, this has been able to survive and adapt and evolve over more than 1,500 years in every single country in the world, different cultures, different languages, different times. So it is a tolerant faith and it is flexible faith, because otherwise it wouldn't have survived this long. It is grounded in the belief in the oneness of God, and that to be a Muslim is to worship God and to effectively live one's life worshiping God. Now, worship doesn't necessarily mean just praying and fasting and doing rituals. Worshiping is how you live your life, how you treat people, right? How you use your wealth, how your relationship with knowledge. So Islam emphasizes knowledge as a priority in every Muslim's life. You should always be learning and studying. And it essentially teaches Muslims that when you treat people with humanity, with humaneness and charity and kindness, that is a form of worship of God. And when you are generous with people and forgiving of people, that is a form of worship. Right? When you are forgiving and or striving to help people with your education, with your skills, or contributing to society in whether you're a lawyer or a doctor, but serving the public interest. Again, it doesn't have to be for free. It's okay to earn money, but you're striving for the common good in whatever way you do. That is a form of worship of God. So it is a highly spiritual religion, but also a very inclusive one. And in fact, it teaches us that God intentionally made us of different races and different languages and different cultures so that we would get to know each other, so that we would learn from each other, not so we would fight each other, right? Not so that we would destroy each other. And that is also, I believe, one of the reasons why it was so inviting and attractive to many African Americans in the early 20th century. And many of them identify as reverts, not converts, because if you study the history, there's a whole discipline that has now arisen about the first Muslims in America who were Black, who were African, who were enslaved Africans. And they were, forcibly brought here as part of chattel slavery from West Africa, which at that time, Islam had existed for centuries and had evolved. And not all of the enslaved Africans were Muslims, but a large number of them were. But as part of the brutality of slavery, anyone who was not a Christian was a heathen. And part of settler colonialism is it was a quote unquote a civilizing project that was theologically grounded. And many of the enslaved Africans, not all of them, whatever faith they had was literally beaten out of them. They had to hide it and they couldn't pass it on to their children. And so at some point in time, Islam, as it was practiced in West Africa, was no longer, at least in that same form, existed among African American or enslaved Africans. And so many of the self-identified themselves as Black Muslims. They saw themselves as reverts. We're going back to this faith that used to be ours. And I think one reason it was so attractive is because it was so inclusive, and it was so tolerant, and it really frowns upon, or actually prohibits, racism. And that you are, if when you identify who are the better people, right? Who is someone to look up to? Who is someone to admire? Who is someone to respect? It is about their actions. It is about their deeds. It is about how they treat people and how they live their life and follow the moral principles of the religion. It is not based on what they look like. It is not based on what language they speak or how much wealth they have or how much power they have. And in fact, when you see the rituals of Islam, it is quite egalitarian, right? We all pray together. It doesn't matter whether you're a king or not, whether you're a wealthy businessman or the person who's earning the lowest wage in the company. When it's time for prayer, everybody prays together. In the same room, in the same line, there is no hierarchy before God. And that is, I think that kind of signals what that tolerance and that egalitarianism. And also there is a strong emphasis on charity. Muslims are supposed to, according to their religion, give 2.5% of their wealth every year to orphans, to widows, to people who are not able to pay their medical expenses, to people who are permanently in debt and can't get out of debt, to people who are poor and are trying or to help someone get educated, right? All of that counts as good deeds or blessings that are a form of worship, right? So those are all, that is the real Islam. That is the Islam that you learn when you go to mosque, when you go to your Islamic studies class, when you are studying the Quran. And it is the 99.9% of Islam that every Muslim is exposed to. Unfortunately, for malicious reasons and then politically motivated reasons that are, in fact, that are connected to empire, the only thing that Americans and Westerners tend to be exposed to when it comes to Islam are these extremist militia groups who are a direct product of wars and conflict and dictatorship and oppression in their physical locales, and who have they have self-proclaimed that they represent Muslims. But if you actually look at how many people follow them and how many people they've been able to recruit out of 1.8 billion people, it's really small. And those who they haven't been able to recruit are not your typical Muslim. And many of them, and again, all this has been studied, that many of them are not even trained formally in Islam. They don't have degrees in Islamic law or Islamic history. Just because you memorize the Quran doesn't mean you actually understand it. It's a very, very complicated book. It is considered the revelation of God. And it takes an entire lifetime to understand it. And many still don't understand everything about it. It's its own kind of discipline. And so if you look to see, well, who are these people in Al-Qaeda or in ISIS or in Boko Haram, these terrorist groups, these militia groups, who are they? They are not schooled in the religion. They don't have a deep expertise. They are gangs. And they said that, hey, we represent Muslims. The vast majority of Muslims look at them and go, no, you don't. The only people that recognize them as representing Muslims are Western governments, because it suits them to be able to say, oh, look, that's why we need to go to war in Afghanistan. That's why we need to go to war in Iraq. That's why we need to not support the Palestinians. That's why we need to support the dictatorships in Muslim majority countries, right? Because God forbid, we would have those people that would otherwise rule, which is not the case. And I'll just kind of point as evidence the Arab Spring. The Arab Spring was one of the most historic, monumental events of that region in multiple generations. And it was nonviolent. It was the people rising up and saying, we don't want to be ruled by dictators. We want self-governance. We want our version of democracy. We don't, and these dictators are all propped up by the U.S. And Europeans. And they have a chokehold on our lives and on our futures. And they all failed. And if you go, and as you study them, I've written a lot about the Arab Spring and some others, it was a direct result of foreign intervention, ensuring that there would not be democracy in these countries, because that would most likely result in those countries not being the puppets of the West. It would compromise and threaten, especially the U.S. hegemony in the region, which would impact its hegemony over the oil production and its military bases in the region and all of its kind of global geopolitical interests. So when Muslims did rise up, they didn't even rise up violently, but the repression was quite violent. And that's why, unfortunately, the reputation of the United States in many Muslim majority countries is very low, because they live the brunt of the empire. Right? They live the consequences of our military engagements, or in the case of Gaza, lack of engagement, that then causes havoc on their lives and oftentimes death and violence. But that is not the Islam that people are taught and people desire. And I'll just end by saying, there is various sayings of the Prophet which are considered secondary sources. And there are multiple ones where it's clear that when there is the option between the most aesthetic versus the most luxurious, or the middle is always chosen, right? So it's like, do you want water? Do you want wine, or do you want milk? And we choose in this particular kind of an analogy, it was milk, because that was the middle road. So that's the irony. Muslims are taught to always take the middle road, to be moderate. And yet we're represented as exclusively extremists. And I think that those who believe that, what I think is a very racist and bad faith narrative, I would encourage you to read for yourself and let your own critical thinking, and it's difficult to read for yourself. It's tedious. It takes a lot of time. But if you're truly interested in understanding your world, then you have to take that time. And I think, again, the vision of Islam is a place to start. And I also would encourage people, if you want to learn more about Islamophobia and about Muslims in America, to go to the YouTube channel of the Center for Security, Race, and Rights and subscribe, because we have numerous experts who write on these lecture series every year, multiple experts who come and talk about Muslims, South Asians, Arabs, or Muslim majority countries. And I'm also the host of the Race and Rights podcast, which I'll put a little plug in if people want to expand their podcast reach. But I do think that, the first word in the Quran is Iqra, which is read. So I would just encourage people to read.
So if people want to reach out personally to you, besides, the other sites and so forth, or even, get your book, how can they do that?
I have a website, saharazizlaw.com. And so there is a way to contact me there. And I will try my best to respond. And also, you can also reach me at csr.rutgers.edu, again, the Center for Security, Race, and Rights, which is the center that I direct. And I'm also on social media at Sahar Aziz Law. That's my tag on all the social media accounts.
Well, Sahar Aziz, I knew this was going to be special. And I greatly appreciated the time. And one of the advantages of having your own thing and you're not caught up with deadlines or other stuff, we could carry on this conversation. However, we cannot carry on this conversation forever. So we're going to have to end it here. But again, I just thank you for coming on the podcast. I greatly appreciate it.
Thank you for hosting me.
All right, guys. So we're going to catch y'all on the other side. All right, and we are back. And so now it's time for my next guest, Walla Blegay. Walla Blegay was elected to serve her first 4-year term on the Prince George's County Council in the November 2022 general election and represents Council District 6. She was elected as vice chair by her peers during her first term on the council. During her first term, she spearheaded an aggressive people-driven agenda, authoring legislation to encourage quality development in the county, limiting tobacco stores and marijuana shops in residential communities, incentivizing healthy restaurants, providing tax credits for public safety employees, creating a task force to address emergency room wait times, requiring security cameras in high-capacity apartment buildings, rent stabilization, and more. As chair of the council, sitting as the Board of Health, she led the efforts of the council addressing nurse-patient ratios, long emergency room wait times, and mental health. She is passionate about civil rights, women's rights, and workers' rights, and the creator and host of the Chat with a Lawyer television talk show, a free legal resource for county residents. A grassroots organizer, she has committed her office to the engagement, education, and empowerment of all stakeholders. An adjunct professor at the American University Washington College of Law and former staff attorney for the D.C. Nurses Association, advocating to improve the working environment for nurses and working families, Councilmember Blegay has been noted as the working people's voice. She has previously served on the Maryland Governor's Task Force for the Study of Economic Development and Apprenticeship Programs, the ACLU of Maryland, Maryland Legislative Agenda for Women, Board of Directors for the Training Source, Prince George's County Human Relations Commission, Prince George's County NAACP, Emerge Maryland, and the Maryland Coalition of Consumer Rights. She has published numerous articles related to civil rights, health care, and education, and is the recipient of the 40 Under 40 in Prince George's County Award, the National Black Caucus of Local Elected Officials Presidential Service Award, and the Daily Records Leading Women Award. Councilmember Blegay is a first-generation Liberian and Nigerian American, graduate of the University of Maryland College Park with a BA in Government and Politics, and she earned a JD from the American University Washington College of Law. She is a proud member of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated. A Prince George's County resident for more than 20 years, Councilmember Blegay resides in Kettering. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my distinct honor and privilege to have as a guest on this podcast, Walla Blegay. All right. The Honorable Walla Blegay Esquire. How you doing, ma'am? You doing good?
I'm doing well. Thank you.
So look, I wanted to get you on because from what I can see, you're one of the up and coming political people.
Oh, wow. Thank you for saying that.
And you are very active in what you do. And so a go-getter from what I've seen. And so,
oh, nice. Thank you.
There's been some issues on a national plane that have affected you. So I wanted to get into that and kind of introduce people to you in the time that I have you.
I appreciate that.
So before we get started on the interview part, I do a couple of things called icebreakers. And so the first icebreaker is a quote. And I want you to respond to this quote. The best way to find yourself is to lose yourself in service of others. What does that quote mean to you?
Well, it means that really you find your purpose when you serve. And that's what you learn, your purpose. You learn what you care about. You learn what drives you. You learn what frustrates you. Service is not an easy job. And service oftentimes you do feel sometimes alone or frustrated, but you can find out that you can find your true purpose and what you're supposed to do. I think service is one of the best things, but it's one of the hardest things to grasp.
Yeah. And I totally agree with that. Service, it's hard for people to give of themselves. And, your natural instinct is to take care of yourself first. And you have to have a special heart to want to do that for other people, especially in the realm of politics. So I definitely agree with what you're saying. The next icebreaker is what we call 20 questions. So I need you to give me a number between 1 and 20.
7.
What do you consider the best way to stay informed about politics, current events, etc.?
Well, we have learned that that's one of the biggest issues with the county is that the lack of information that people feel they're not receiving. So one of the things we did is, first of all, we have a very active listserv that people can join. They can reach out to my office at Council District 6 at co.pg.md.us. We're also really active on social media. So if you're on the gram, you can follow me at Walla KB. And we make sure that we keep people very informed of everything that we're doing so that people can feel engaged. Because that's the biggest issue is that I found, and I tell people, I found out so much once I became a council member which shouldn't be the case. But it's the case is that now I'm a council member. All these resources that we have, now I know. Now I know that they're available. Now I know how to promote them to the community. So I really actually have learned from that we need to do better keeping people engaged.
Okay. When did you decide that you wanted to be in the arena of law and politics?
Very early on, actually. When I was in college, I started off as, first of all, I would say that some of the things that I've always told people to bring your kids in the room. And there's a reason why I've said that, because I've learned that a lot of my work started, my parents were really active, and especially the African community when I was young, because we had a lot of Liberians coming here through TPS, through the TPS program as refugees, and we would advocate for them to get, even though we didn't come to the United States through that program, we were advocating for the large number of Liberians that were coming in at the time of the 90s when the war started. So we would meet with the council members in D.C. We even came to Prince George's County to meet with, at the time, the county executive was Paris Glendenning. So we did all of those when I was young, and I know that never left me. And once I got to college, I started off with pre-med, but I took a government politics class, and I realized that, that was really at the center of my heart, was that the community aspect. I wanted to go back to what we did when I was young. But you just don't quite understand what your path is taking you on. And I ended up interning in Annapolis for a delegate who was all about young people. So that was like the best storm to actually start off with someone that was like, I want young people to get involved. And that was like what he believed. He was so about young people getting involved. And that actually had such an impact on me. And after that, I became sold in getting involved with politics. And I worked in Annapolis. After that, I did organizing with the unions. I worked on campaigns. I was all in. And then later on, I decided to run myself. So you never know. Like I said, bring your kids in the room, because I do believe this all started when I was basically going with my parents to all of those meetings as a kid. And I was like 4 or 5 years old. So it was not like I started off like as a grown up. It was really a baby and still engaged.
Yeah. So I first found out about Prince George's County, Maryland, when it was recognized as the most populous and the most affluent African-American county in America. Is that still the case?
Well, I would say they're arguing that we're competing now with Charles County, but what I will say is that Prince George's County has the most unique story. This went for a rural white town to a majority African American affluent community, regardless of the fact that we're dealing with poverty in certain areas, as we have an influx of people moving in from DC. I mean, we went from, a small county of 300,000 to almost 1 million people. And in the midst of that, we have always had pockets of poverty within our community. And I think that some people have said, oh, is there wealth if you have schools that are troubled and all of those things? What people don't realize is that the poverty in our community is it's not seen in the big houses, it's seen in the school system. That's where people have to come to get education because they can't afford to put their kids in private schools. And that's where we see a lot of the poverty issues in the county. You see it right in the school system. So it is one of those things where while we have the wealth, we do have the wealth. There are things that impact our community that are unique to other groups. First of all, we're going to have pockets of poverty because with people of color, they're trying to climb up the ladder. They're trying to get where they are. We have pockets of poverty in our county that we are trying to address. And a lot of those things are going to see themselves in the school system. However, because of we have a lot of houses, but we have a very difficult time getting the quality economic development. Why? Because the big powers that be in the economic world don't value a majority African American community. We have to do a lot to even attract them to consider our community. So some people are just sitting up there saying, well, why can't we get a Whole Foods and all that? Because we have so much to do. When we go and tell them, they'll tell us, oh, we're looking at it. This is not a good fit for us. All of this stuff. No one's going to say it's because you have Black people there, but we can sense where they're going and why they won't come. So because of that, we have our money, our revenues are smaller than surrounding jurisdictions like Montgomery County, even DC, because DC it's a city, so it has a large number of commercial development. So while DC has a $20 billion budget, Montgomery County has an $8 billion budget, we're out here struggling with a $5 billion budget, trying to take care of 1 million people. I mean, DC has only 700,000 people, and Montgomery County has the same amount of people and $3 billion more to play with, not to mention they don't have as much of the population of need that we have. So we have to, and then we also have to deal with the media and how they portray the county because of our cult, because of our race. And let's just face it, I get more calls from the media when there's a fight at a school or fight here and there. There's fights everywhere, but they're going to cover that. But then when we have good things in the county, we have a very difficult time getting them to cover that. So we have to learn to tell our own story. So while we have the wealth, we have the challenges.
Yeah, that's enlightening to know. And then your county government is structured differently than a lot of county governments I've experienced. And that's one of the cool things about this country is that each state, kind of operates and charters counties and cities in their own way. So you actually have a county executive branch and a county legislative branch. Whereas like I'm here in Georgia and I lived in Mississippi and in Illinois and Chicago primarily. And so the county officers, whether they call it commissioners or supervisors, whatever, they have kind of a hybrid executive legislative function, but y'all actually have a separation.
Yeah, I think that the charter, so smaller counties have county commissioners, and county commissioners usually kind of run the government. They're one and the same. They have a function of executive and legislative. But once you get a county executive charter, so they changed the charter 30 years ago for the county, moving it from commissioners to county executive. And then that was for Montgomery County. So the bigger counties have what Prince George's County has. The smaller counties are still on county commissioner. In fact, you will see in Charles County, that's becoming a big hot topic there because they're moving up in numbers. I think they're at 300,000 now. So they're ready to change. Some of the people are ready to change over to county executive, but there is a large group that doesn't want it because it's a big change and it gives an executive one person the power to make a lot of decisions regardless of a legislative branch. And so that is definitely a very controversial issue in Charles County right now.
Okay. So I want to talk about, a couple of issues before you have to go. One is talk about how the federal layoffs by DOGE and then the current federal shutdown has impacted the citizens of Prince George's County, and what steps has the county done to navigate these situations?
Well, we've been put in a pretty bad situation. We do know, and we feel very strongly that this attack has been on us. Like, this is an attack on Prince George's County. And so we do get that and we understand that. And it is because we're a majority African-American county. We have seen record layoffs. If you see the numbers, they even show that the biggest number of individuals who have been impacted by all of these layoffs has been Black women, which is where we fall because we have a lot of leadership, a lot of women have gotten degrees, gotten into these jobs. So we do feel like this is an attack on us. We've had a number of attacks. Number one, we have over 73,000 federal workers. We've seen record numbers of layoff. We're still trying to get the numbers of how many are just in the county because a lot of our federal workers might live here, but they work in D.C., Montgomery, Virginia, all over. So we're trying to still get the numbers of those. And the next other place is Montgomery County. So we've had record number of layoffs. We have been downgraded in credit rating because of the attack on our area. They're trying to move federal agencies out of the county. I know you saw the recent talk is about the Beltsville Agricultural Center. They're trying to close it down and move the move the workers out, which means that a lot of people are living in the county simply because they work for the federal government. So by sort of moving agencies outside of this region or outside of the county, we're going to lose residents. In addition, we're dealing with the FBI was supposed to be a game changer when it comes to economic development. We pretty much won the bid for that during Biden, but now Trump has ended that and started to move the FBI all over the country outside of the region. So for now, we're going to still fight. We're filing lawsuits and everything to still keep the FBI, but that was supposed to be really seal the deal. You know, we have NASA at Greenbelt. We were going to add the FBI. We already have Fort Meade not that far away. So this was going to be part of our economic package to powers that be in economic development to bring quality to Prince George's County. That's impacting that. So we are getting hit all the way on the side at the time that we're trying to transition ourselves from suburban to even urban areas. We're getting hit by the layoffs. If these layoffs get to the point that it impacts giving foreclosures, then we're in real trouble because that's going to impact our overall budget. We're already getting impact with our overall budget. The state has let us know that the Trump administration has refused to pay reimbursements for things like free and reduced lunches, things like that. So that's going to come back to us, and we're going to have to look for ways to fill in the gaps of federal funding that we're going to lose.
So I know that y'all were trying to create some kind of temporary stipend for the federal workers that were laid off. I think it was like 1,000.
Yeah, that didn't go through because we don't have the funding. I couldn't get my colleagues to vote on that. What we passed was a priority hiring bill that would give priority hiring to those who are federal workers. And then also we were going to create a food bank database that will help people who need food to get food quickly. And so we're trying to do that. And then of course we're going to work with our workforce development arm, Employ Prince George's, to make sure that they provide funding and support for training for our workers. But yeah, it is. We do have the state now has been able to put things in place, and the state has been really helpful, and that's been helpful for us.
Gotcha. All right.
Yeah.
The other thing that caught my attention, explain to the listeners about your legislation called the Food as Medicine Health Program Act of 2025.
Yeah, I mean, that's really exciting. So we have a county, like I said, there's wealth in the county. We have a lot of big houses, but a lot of people are looking to actually get healthy. And then we are living in food swamps where we have just communities of fast food. So we're trying to change that. We have a lot of farms in the county. So food is medicine. It's supposed to be a way to bring farm to table in communities to help deal with chronic illness and things like that. Our highest death rate is not gun violence. It is heart disease. So this is what we're trying to do to address this issue. And that's why we're trying to work on that. On the Food as Medicine is supposed to create a program under the Department of Health that will facilitate relationships when it comes to farmers, bringing food, connecting them with our healthcare systems to allow them to give almost a food pharmacy to residents, that they will get healthy foods that will improve their blood pressure and blood sugar and such. I learned about bitter melon that's being sold right now at a farm in my district, Aswana Farms, and that is supposed to help bring down blood sugar if you eat it and know how to cook it. So they even have ways to teach you how to cook it, and they have ways to tell you how to eat it so it can help your blood sugar. So I've been doing that. It has worked. So it's been really great. So I definitely think at this point that this is a step in the right direction. We had a healthy restaurants bill 2 years ago that I put forth that would give incentives to healthy businesses so that they could come to the county. And that was a way to kind of fill our shopping centers with healthier options versus food swamps. I mean, we're everywhere we turn, we've got a Chick-fil-A and McDonald's and Wendy's and Burger King, and So we're just trying to change that for our community, especially because we have a lot of people who want to be healthy and sometimes they have busy jobs. So, they might not be able to go home and cook and everything. So what our retail should support healthier options.
Yeah. And just to break it down, the real concept is when you go to a doctor, the doctor can not only prescribe pills, but they could say, I need you to eat X amount of cabbage or, as you say, bitter melon. They can actually write a prescription for you to be able to get those food products.
Okay. Yeah, no, that's exactly what it is. They have a program at University of Maryland, National Capital Region, right in my district that has that. So what they would do is that technically this is something that we need to address. Our hospitals are saying there's nothing that gives them the authority to really tell you, here's ways to bring down your blood pressure, but through pills, there's no coding. But what they can do is just refer you to the food pharmacy. And when you get there, they have a food pharmacy that's run by the Capital Area Food Bank. And that one has a lot of it talks about what the foods have, the good, and basically what their health benefits are.
Yeah. So I know I'm pressed for time. I wanted to get into one of the other things because you and I had some experience being on dealing with transportation and talk about the EV charging stations and all that. But I know that's something that you're pushing very strong.
Yeah, and we passed that bill last year, and basically this bill is supposed to allow electric charging stations for new developments. And this will allow it because what we found is that a lot of people want to buy electric vehicles, but they don't have the infrastructure for electric vehicles is very low in the county. There's not many charging stations. There's not many charging. And if somebody has that difficulty, I was one of those people that had an interest. If you look around and there's no charging station around, then you're not going to get an electric vehicle. You're going to keep with their gas-powered vehicle because of the infrastructure is there. So we do, the most aggressive one has been the District of Columbia, and we're trying to follow along and making sure they require for new development. And they've had a lot of new development that there be a pretty high percentage of electric charging vehicle stations. And now we do understand developers have been clear that it is costly for them, especially now dealing with the current administration, which doesn't provide the tax credits that were provided before.
Right. All right. So let's close this out with this question. When your time on the county council is over, how do you want to be remembered and what impact do you want to have?
My work is driven by one thing, people first. And I want people to understand that as I'm really running to represent them, that I'm thinking about their concerns with everything that I do. And I want that to be with people. I don't want to hear that, oh, she's in the bag with all these, corporate interests against her own people. No. Then that's what I want people to know, that I am definitely focused on making sure that that their voices are heard at every table.
All right. Well, Walla Blegay, I really appreciate you taking the time. You've already kind of told people how to get in touch with you and all that, so I appreciate that. And I look forward to seeing more of you and hearing more about the good work that you're doing. And one of the rules I want to state before you have to go is that now that you've been on the show, you have an open invitation to come back. If there's anything that you want to say, hey, look, Erik, we need to talk about this, just feel free to reach out before I have to reach out to you. Does that sound like a good deal?
Yes. Thank you.
All right. All right, guys. And we'll catch y'all on the other side. All right. And we are back. So I want to thank Sahar Aziz and Walla Blegay for coming on to the podcast. Professor Aziz is an incredible intellectual, and I'm glad that she is on the side of democracy and justice. And, I know some people won't agree with everything that she says or does, but she brings receipts. and, and is very passionate about what she does. I stand with her on a lot of issues, but I know that not everybody does, and that's fine, but her battle is to make sure that all of us have a voice in the process, right? And the more intellectual debate, the better, because we're not debating just to argue with each other or score points over each other. The whole point of debate, the whole point of free speech is to come up with solutions, right? That's why it was the First Amendment. It wasn't about just saying what you wanted to say. There has to be a tangible point behind that. You say what you want to say because you want to affect change, right? You want to make a difference. So you voice your opinion. You have the right to assemble, right? And you have the right to exercise whatever faith you want. That's the very First Amendment. And so I am glad that there are people out there like Professor Aziz that passionately defend that amendment. And I look forward to future visits with her and the work that she is doing, right? And then the same can be said for Councilwoman Blegay. She didn't really have a whole lot of time. She carved out some time to come on, but I wanted her to understand that it's more than just the people in Prince George's County that's watching what she's doing, right? You want to lift up public servants who are doing the right thing, who understands the commitment that you have to be in the public service. And, how she is constantly pressing for the betterment of her district and the county as a whole, right? I think that's an incredible idea to set it up where, you go to the doctor and you need some help dealing with diabetes or dealing with high blood pressure, heart disease, whatever. And instead of just giving you drugs, they can prescribe food. That's a classic example of innovation, of American leadership at work, right? And, and then I wanted to give a realistic picture of what's happening in those counties that have a lot of federal workers, and that she's been on the forefront of trying to find some ways to help and then try to mitigate the economic impacts of those layoffs or firings, right? So I hope that you got that out of that. And it's a shame that we couldn't talk longer, but I think you got the gist of what she and others like her are dealing with. And so I definitely wanted her on to talk about those things. And I was glad we was able to get in some discussion about the EV chargers as well, because those are a lot of her ideas. And there's a whole other issue where they're trying to continue to build up she talked about the FBI building situation. So the FBI was supposed to move into Prince George's County. And now, and then Kash Patel got in there and said, well, we're going to tear down the Hoover building or make it a museum or whatever, right? And then now all of a sudden, we're not going to move the FBI, at least not move the building. Now they're talking about they don't want to have a central main office. They just want FBI agents scattered throughout the country. And I guess the only central person you need to talk to is Kash Patel. So I guess the FBI can have a room in the White House. I don't know. Right. But I'm going to get into that a little more. But I just wanted to thank Councilwoman Blegay, and I hope that in the future we're able to get her back on and kind of monitor everything. She'll be up for re-election in 2026 along with all the congressional races. And so I wish her well in that. And maybe she can come on before that. I don't know. But those are the type of elected officials I want to, if I can get them on, is to constantly remind people that there are folks out there that take the oath of office to serve and understand the assignment, right? I felt that I was that kind of a person. There are some people that disagree with that, and that's fine. That's why I'm not still in that position. But I felt that during the time that I did serve, I understood the assignment, and I did the best I could to help the people in my district and in my state do better. And I know that I had a positive impact on what was happening. So, and that's all you can do is your best, right? Unlike the folks that are in office now, I think there's a number of people who don't understand the assignment. They're in it for the wrong reasons. They're in it for publicity. They're in it for ego and ambition. And then there's just some that's in it, just to say that, yeah, I did that. And they have no clue about what they're doing, right? And, their conviction is based on whoever the polls say is winning or whoever's in charge. And you can't do that. I'll never forget one of the disheartening things that ever happened to me when I was in the legislature was we were in a budget fight. And there were some of us that were kind of concerned about the way the appropriations was going. And it wasn't exactly in line with what the speaker wanted. So I'm in the lounge and I was talking to a member who had been there for a while. And, we got to talking about it and he just said, well, I'm just going to do what the speaker says. Right. And I said, say that again. He said, I'm just going to do what the speaker says do, And then I asked him, I said, did the people in your district elect the speaker or did they elect you? Right. Because now if everything that the speaker is pushing for jives with what, is good for your district, okay, I get that. But I don't know. They were talking about some cuts in education, some cuts in the Department of Transportation and different places. And it was kind of like, seems like those were things we're fighting for, right? And, again, people elect their representatives. They don't elect the leadership of the body once we all get there. We do that. We decide who the leadership's going to be. But, even if we voted for these particular people, that doesn't mean that they get a pass on everything that comes out of their mouth or every idea that hits their brain, right? That's what we're there for. We're supposed to debate these issues. We're supposed to come up with a solution that is beneficial to everybody in the state. Meanwhile, keeping an eye on what's best for the constituents that put us in that position, right? And for Black folks, sometimes the interests of Black folks are not in the interest of the state or vice versa, however you want to phrase it. So, we have to look out for that. And then, I had a district where I had a lot of Republicans. So I had to weigh out, what's in the best interest of Black folks, what's in the best interest of some of these rich white folks that I represented, and just try to, come up with a balance that's fair for everybody. Right. Because, in economics, you got a head start, but you wanted to keep the playing field as even as possible. And that's the challenge, right? But the lazy thing is to just say, well, I'm going to do what I want to do. And I'm not going to care as long as I get the benefit out of it, as long as I can make money, as long as I can get my name in the newspaper or on social media or on TV, radio, whatever, right? As long as, everybody bows down to me, I'm good. That's not how this works. I'm sitting up here and, a lot of news agencies didn't cover it, but I saw where now the president is already in the middle of building this grand ballroom, which, by the way, during the federal shutdown, the construction of that ballroom is still going. But now he wants to talk about building something similar to the Arc de Triomphe, right? Or the Arc that's in, I guess that's Washington Square in New York. you know, he wants to build an ark like right in front of the Arlington National Cemetery or whatever, or nearby, in time for the 250th birthday of the United States, right? And so in the middle of a government shutdown, you decide to reveal this plan, which to me sends a message that you really don't give a damn about any of us at all. It's all about you and all about what you want to do. And again, how much money you going to make and all this stuff. I just, and I saw this sister come on TikTok and she's talking about, she's apologizing for voting for Trump, because what she's seeing now is not what she voted for and all that buyer's remorse kind of thing. But I get that, but it's not like this guy wasn't president before, right? He had 4 years and the people voted him out. And, it's just kind of suspect that all of a sudden people thought within those 4 years. Now, mind you, during those 4 years, he wasn't president. He got indicted and convicted. He was found guilty of fraud. He was found guilty of sexual harassment or assault, right? Well, the sexual assault was a civil penalty, but nonetheless, he's guilty, right? Same way that people saw OJ was guilty. Even though in the criminal case, he was acquitted, in the civil case, he was not. He was hit with a wrongful death settlement. So, Trump was guilty of everything that he went to court for. And he would have been found guilty in Georgia, right? So, because people pled guilty that were part of the plan, right? So, why millions of Americans felt, okay, after seeing all that, and then him being in denial that he lost the election and doing everything to create chaos in the middle of all that. It just, I just don't understand why people thought that it was okay for him to come back. But nonetheless, he's there. And now people are saying that, yeah, nothing changed. It's actually gotten worse because now all the stuff that he couldn't do the first time, he's going whole hog on it. He's redesigning the White House to look like, I don't know. I mean, just, gold everywhere. And I mean, it's just, and then, trying to indict everybody that he doesn't like. Right. I don't get it. I don't know what people saw. I don't know, but I guess, the parallel in my mind is, when Moses went to the mountain to go get the 10 Commandments, by the time he came back, the people were worshiping a golden calf instead of the God that delivered them from bondage, right? Even though they know that golden calf had nothing to do with it, they created that calf, but in the 40 years that they were wandering around and they didn't have to worry about food and their clothes didn't wear out, but they wanted to worship a calf. I mean, it's just a reminder of the human existence and how we can easily get fooled, how we easily can fall into a trap of what's before us instead of what the big picture is, right? And, and now we got people, instead of, and there's a lot of people protesting this, right? The No Kings protests, all that stuff. So we know that people are out there. But, the people that are going after the former vice president on a book tour, saying that she was a war criminal and all this stuff. And I'm like, one, that's a stretch, I mean, it's a guilt by association thing if that's what you want to do. But then two, she's not in a position to do anything. If she had won the election, it's like then the ceasefire, between Israel and Hamas would have been on her watch, right? The possible end of the Ukraine-Russia war would be on her watch. The war in the Congo and other conflicts in Africa, right? She would be dealing with the Madagascar coup, right? I mean, all these things would have been under her purview at that point, and then she would have had people in place to deal with that. But she's on a book tour because she did not win. So protesting her is not the best strategy. And considering that the people who are organizing the protests against her are not from her community, that doesn't help at all, right? So, again, you have the right to do that, but you saw her response and she had the right to respond that way, right? I just think that focus. Don't go for the low-hanging fruit. Focus on what needs to be done. Let's really get in and do the work. I know it's going to be hard. It's going to be hard to fix the damage that's being done, right? Because we're just talking about we haven't even finished the first year of this second term. So by the time this 4-year term is over, it's going to be a lot of damage that has to be undone. And maybe a Congress that says no to the president, for the last 2 years might, ameliorate some of those damages, or slow them down, but it's going to be a lot of work. But again, it's an opportunity. It's an opportunity for new leadership to emerge and take this country in another direction, hopefully in a more positive one, and drive out the voices of discontent, right? And when I say discontent, I mean not the people who disagree with a particular issue that we can debate in the spirit of moving forward, but maybe discontent's not maybe malcontent. I don't know, where you just don't like change because it's change. You can't get over the fact that the country is not a majority white country anymore, or that, people that work for a living want to get paid a wage where they can live their life. And, that means that you might not make as much profit personally as you used to because you've got to pay people what they deserve, right? I mean, nobody is asking people to bankrupt folks deliberately. But if you can afford 8 houses, you're probably running a corporation that you can pay people more than a living wage. I'm just saying. So, that's what we gotta get past. This, I'm angry for what? Well, it just seems like, no. Substantively, why are you angry? Right? Now, if there's any people, right, that can say they're angry, black folks can say they're angry all the time. But then you'll say, well, we're being professional victims, when there's evidence to show that a lot of stuff that you did to black folks has had a generational impact. Native Americans, indigenous people. We just celebrated Indigenous Peoples Day, right? They got a reason to be angry because you basically came and took their land, right? Which reminds me, before I sign off, in the United States, indigenous people have dual citizenship, right? They're citizens of the United States. They can vote in presidential and congressional elections. And they have citizenship on their tribal land. And even though, I appreciate Brother Echo Hawk's opinion about my thoughts, I still think there should be a division. Even if you want to keep a division in the Department of Interior, I still think there needs to be a division in the Department of State to focus in on the political relationship between Native American nations and the federal government, right? But they have dual citizenship. So as I'm looking at the situation in Israel, you know, these hardliners are saying, well, we don't want a Palestinian state. We don't support a two-state solution. All right. Well, give the people that are there, every person that's currently in Israel right this minute, give them citizenship in the state of Israel. Stop running Israel as a theocracy. Run it as a true democracy. That way, it doesn't matter if you're Palestinian or Israeli, you know, Jewish, you're a citizen of the state of Israel. And, you know, even if the Palestinians say, well, we want a rebuilt Gaza or we want total control of the West Bank. Okay. But they still should have citizenship. They still should be able to travel throughout the country freely. They shouldn't have an area that's cordoned off from trade or, you know, and if you do provide a section for them to live, that you don't turn around and violate that agreement and build condos there all the time. Kibbutz, you know, just give them citizenship and give them the ability. So if you give them citizenship, then they can run for office, right? They can serve in the Knesset. I'm just saying, you know, at some point in time, this extremist, racist mindset has to end. We're all here on this planet to coexist. We are not here to isolate ourselves from the world. It's like, why do we have these computers in our hand if we can't interact with the rest of the planet? Everything that we get, that's why this tariff thing is a big deal, because the economy is global. It's not just American-made stuff anymore. Now, I would like to see more stuff made in America so we have more products that compete around the world, but it's a global economy now. So that means we have to interact with people that are not Americans, right? And I know that's hard for some people to grasp, but that's the reality that we're in. And the sooner that you come to grips with that reality, the more peaceful our existence will be in this country. And I promise, if we have a peaceful existence, it'll be infectious. I had a guest on one time that said that racism was an infectious disease, right? Infectious mental disease. And I agree with that. And I say the counter to that is peace. I think peace is more infectious and it's definitely healthier. And we need to start looking that way. You know, individually, you're going to have your struggles, right? But from a political perspective, from a government perspective, our job is to alleviate as many of those struggles as possible, to try to keep people from having to go through as many hardships. Individual choices are what they are. But if we really want to be Christ-like, or if we really want to adhere to the principles of God, as many quote-unquote politicians say they do, then we have to have that kind of a mindset that we're here to provide you with opportunities. And people say, well, you know, people got opportunities now. Not enough. And just because we're on the same track, if you've got a 10-yard head start, that's not equal. Yeah, we both on the track, but it's not equal, right? Or should I say it's not equitable, right? Because you can make the argument we're equally on the track. But if you got a 10-yard head start over me, then it's not equitable. So we just got to get into a mindset of doing right with each other. And we got to elect people that understand that concept. You know, we understand that we're not electing saints. We're not canonizing people. We're just electing people to do a job. And, you know, when people fall short, they will either fall into the just judicial system, or they'll fall into electoral system and be unelected. But we have that power to make that so. We can fix that mistake. So let's focus in on doing better. Let's focus in on treating each other better, and let's support those actors of democracy that are out there doing the right thing. Even if you don't agree with everything that they're doing from a political, ideological standpoint, if their heart's in the right place, we can have some peace and come up with a solution that benefits everyone. All right. That's all I got time for. Thank y'all for listening. Until next time.
NBG Podcast Network.